If you know the song Waltzing Matilda, you know the story of a jolly swag man, a 19th century traveler who camped by billabongs and sang as he waited for his tea to boil. He was a transient laborer who walked the massive, punishing expanses of the Outback, carrying everything he owned in a single canvas bedroll. Modern travelers often expect their vacations to come with climate control and predictable itineraries, but Western Australia spans over 1 million square miles of arid terrain. The scale of this landscape is uncompromising, often clashing with the modern desire for constant comfort. To find the joy mentioned in those old songs, you have to intentionally shift your perspective. You must trade the insulated bubble of modern luxury for a survivalist mindset, matching the environment's hostility with your own adaptability. Experiencing the Outback requires you to leave civilization behind and adopt the same rugged, self-reliant resilience that defined those early travelers. The journey into extreme isolation starts in Perth. It's a highly developed urban center where glass skyscrapers sit against the Swan River. To leave the city safely, you need a machine built for the terrain. This four-wheel drive bus is the modern equivalent of a swagman's horse. It sits on tires so large that getting inside requires a 2-foot climb just to reach the first step. Early on the road, our driver spotted a motorist who had backed up too far into the brush and gotten stuck. We stopped, but since neither vehicle had a tow rope, we couldn't help him. We had to continue on, leaving him to solve his own problem. That encounter illustrates a rigid law of the Outback. Once the paved roads end, you are responsible for your own safety. If you don't bring the solution with you, you are effectively on your own. To reach the first landmark, you have to drive 620 kilometers. In Western Australia, you cover an immense amount of flat, repeating scrubland before the geography offers anything new. Eventually, the road leads to the Pinnacles. It is an eerie field of jagged limestone spires jutting out of the yellow sand, standing between the desert dunes and the open sea. In the 1600s, Dutch explorers spotted these formations from their ships. Viewing the coast through antique telescopes, they saw the vertical pillars and mistook the area for the ruins of a lost city. Walking among thousands of these pillars today, you feel the specific reverence the land demands. The spires are a quiet, mysterious highlight in a day otherwise defined by the grueling distance of the drive. The Pinnacles have remained unchanged for millennia, even as the world beyond the dunes transformed. Moving through them is a physical encounter with deep time, where the fast-paced concerns of modern life are replaced by the slow rhythm of the desert. Navigating this terrain requires a guide with specific knowledge. Our driver, Bill, functioned as a walking library of primitive bushcraft, using the land and stars as his primary tools. At night, Bill showed us how to tell time by the stars. By tracking the rotation of the Southern Cross, a constellation visible only south of the equator, you can maintain your orientation even in total darkness. He also taught us a trick for measuring the day. If you stretch your hand toward the horizon and stack 4 fingers between the ground and the sun, you know exactly 1 hour of daylight remains. This knowledge is vital because of how quickly the weather can turn. Bill told us about a previous trip where he was sleeping under the bus when a sudden, violent cyclone hit the campsite. He ordered campers to take cover under a heavy picnic table, but the wind was so powerful it took the shelter and table with it. The group spent the rest of the night huddled inside the bus as trees snapped around them. These skills and stories are the only thing separating an adventure from a disaster. Out here, understanding the environment is the difference between surviving a storm and being swept away by it. We reached our campsite after dark. It was a pitch-black, isolated spot near the ocean, illuminated only by the moon and the stars of the Southern Cross. There were no tents for the 19-day trip. Instead, we were introduced to our swags, the traditional bedrolls used by the travelers in the song. A swag is a canvas zip-up bag containing a thin foam mattress and a sleeping bag. It is a minimalist setup designed to be unrolled directly onto the dirt, offering the most basic protection possible. When you zip yourself into that canvas, you are living the historical lifestyle of the swagman. You are physically connected to the ground with no walls or floors to separate you from the environment. This experience removes the artificial barriers of modern life. There is no insulation and no locked door. There is only the wind, the moon, and the physical reality of the outback. Sleeping in the dirt forces a direct physical engagement with the landscape that modern convenience typically filters out. While the conditions are harsh, there is a distinct freedom in that level of simplicity. It's an ordeal that proves you can still thrive on the basics, a realization that brings back a sense of adventure and leaves you feeling genuinely young at heart. Humans rely on fixed points of reference. We intuitively know which way is up, which way is down, and we trust that the night sky above us will remain a reliable, familiar map for comfort. Waking up in the remote Australian outback, specifically near the sand dunes of Lucky Bay, shatters that expectation. You step outside in the early morning and look up to find the sky you've lived under your whole life has shifted into something unrecognizable. The sky holds a recognizable shape, the famous hourglass constellation, Orion the Hunter. Yet its orientation is wrong. The entire constellation is upside down compared to its position in the northern hemisphere. This occurs because of your position on the globe. Traveling to the extreme southern hemisphere changes your physical angle relative to the equator. You are viewing those equatorial stars from the opposite side of the planet. Losing a basic navigational anchor forces an immediate realignment of perspective. It is the first step in a journey that continuously challenges our understanding of scale. Take one specific point of light in that inverted constellation, Betelgeuse. In the north, it's the upper left star of Orion, but here it sits at the bottom right. This star is a red giant. To understand that scale, compare it to our sun. While Betelgeuse is a red giant, our sun is a red dwarf. Our star is a literal speck next to its massive neighbor. If Betelgeuse were placed where our sun is today, its mass would extend far enough to consume Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Pulling our focus away from distant stars and closer to Earth, the outback sky reveals more localized anomalies. You might see a bright, non-twinkling object moving steadily across the darkness, cutting through the constellations. Unlike flickering stars, this light shines with a steady glow. It is the International Space Station, orbiting just above the horizon between Australia and Antarctica. Perceiving these objects together, a star large enough to swallow planets, and a human-made station gliding through the vacuum, creates a jarring friction between light years and kilometers. Back on the surface, that sense of scale takes a physical, terrestrial form. The Western Australian coastline is defined by a massive, arid scale, where deep red earth meets turquoise water. Navigating the sand dunes at Lucky Bay requires an immense amount of energy. Moving through this land means dropping heavy 4x4 vehicles down vertical dunes and using sandboards to manage the shifting terrain. Inland, the landscape fractures at Murchison Gorge. It is a sheer vertical drop through ancient red rock, carved out over millennia by the river below. Hiking to the bottom is a grueling physical test. Every step down the steep, narrow rock face requires balance and constant focus, demanding a physical respect for the terrain. The outback is an aggressive geological force. It is an environment that only allows passage if you are willing to match its severity with physical endurance. Zooming in closer reveals the unpolished biological reality of the ecosystem. Here, roaming wildlife like emus occupy the same space as the infrastructure we use to cross the desert. Life here is fragile. Finding a sheep tangled in roadside barbed wire is a common, gritty occurrence. Saving it requires manual intervention, using a multi-tool to cut it free from the wire that slowly claimed it. Some biological threats are smaller and more invasive. At night, the desert belongs to the insects. Sleeping in the wild carries a distinct sensory vulnerability. An insect crawling deep into the ear canal of a sleeping traveler creates an endless internal buzzing that is impossible to ignore. Managing this requires improvised medicine. The insect must be drowned inside the ear with cooking oil to stop its movement before a traveler can reach a medical clinic for extraction. Nature's reach extends from the massive gorge walls to the millimeter-long legs of an insect. It is a landscape that tests our boundaries through both the overwhelming and the microscopic. From the medical clinics of Chinaman's Beach to the caravan parks at Shark Bay, the miles traveled bridge the gap between those cosmic observations and the grit beneath our fingernails. The journey forces an encounter with three distinct scales of adversity: cosmic insignificance beneath Betelgeuse, physical exhaustion in the gorge, and the invasive reality of a trapped insect. We usually live in spaces that provide a buffer against these extremes. We spend our time where the direction of the stars is irrelevant, and our physical safety is taken for granted. True exploration into a place like the Outback is a masterclass in humility. It strips away our control and proves that whether measured in light years or millimeters, the natural world always commands absolute respect. We woke up early at this remote outpost to start day 3 of a 19-day journey along the Western Australian coast. The goal for the morning was to meet the famous wild dolphins of Shark Bay as they moved through these shallow waters. The phenomenon began 2 decades ago when a single visitor successfully offered a fish to a wild dolphin right in the surf. Once word spread that these animals would accept food from people, the shoreline began to draw massive crowds. However, as the number of visitors increased, the side effects of this constant interaction began to surface. The dolphins were reacting to a new set of incentives, and the presence of easy, unlimited food was altering their natural behavior. Rangers noticed a series of alarming physical changes. Some female dolphins became so bloated from overfeeding that they beached themselves in the shallows, unable to get back to sea, while others stopped caring for their calves entirely. The social order of the pod also shifted. The males became increasingly aggressive toward each other, and the lack of oversight allowed some tourists to commit acts of cruelty, like putting lit cigarettes into the dolphins' blowholes. To prevent further harm, an agency called Conservation and Land Management, or CALM, took control of the shoreline and established a strict protocol. Feeding is now strictly rationed. Rangers limit handouts to 1/3 of a dolphin's daily requirement, ensuring they still hunt in the wild. The protocol also accounts for gender. Because of observed aggression, males receive no handouts at all, only females are fed. The management even extends to the local pelicans. They had grown aggressive stealing from the dolphins, that they now have their own regulated feeding schedule to keep them away from the tourists. While the experience feels like a wild encounter, it actually relies on this invisible, daily micromanagement to keep the animals healthy. At midday, we left the managed shoreline behind and boarded a large catamaran called the Shotover to look for marine life further out in the bay. This is the creature we were searching for, the dugong. But despite being in their natural habitat, we didn't spot a single lund during our hour on the water. From this boardwalk at Eagle Bluff, we had a perfect vantage point over the water. Yet the eagles the area is named for never appeared. It turns out a family on the exact same boat just 24 hours earlier saw plenty of dolphins and dugongs. Outside of the managed feeding zones, nature does not follow a tourist's schedule. It operates purely on chance. This close-up of Shell Beach shows that the shoreline is composed of millions of tiny white shells. Even though this is a World Heritage Site, the landscape is still used for industrial purposes. The shells are mined to pave local footpaths, used as a calcium supplement in chicken feed, and even processed into lime for the cement industry. However, like the dolphins, this resource is governed by strict limits. The mining is kept at a scale that ensures the beach can replenish itself. We finished the day back at the caravan park with a steak barbecue, reflecting on the day's events. The health of the dolphin pods and the survival of places like Shell Beach depend on the specific diet percentages and mining quotas we saw today. Protecting these wonders isn't about avoiding them, but about finding the specific boundaries that allow us to coexist without causing a collapse. Ningaloo Reef stretches for 200 kilometers along the coast of Western Australia. This vibrant, turquoise ecosystem is the type of obvious natural beauty that draws people from all over the world. Reaching a remote location like this requires a long trek through the interior. You have to spend hours navigating endless, straight roads that cut through a flat and remarkably arid landscape. It is easy to look out at this horizon and see nothing but a featureless void. To the casual observer, the terrain between the highway and the coast appears to be a great deal of absolute nothingness. However, this raises a question about how we value land. If this environment is as barren as it looks, it would be unlikely to host multiple protected World Heritage Sites. Judging a landscape solely by its postcard aesthetics creates a significant blind spot. By focusing only on the obvious beauty of the destination, we often drive right past the profound history hidden in the journey. At a roadside stop near the coast, you'll find the Stromatolites. These lumpy formations sitting in the shallow water are, by most standards, pretty ugly. They look like ordinary, mossy rocks scattered along the shoreline. These are actually the oldest known form of life on Earth. Aside from one other site in South America, this is the only place on the planet where these organisms are still visible today. These structures represent the very base of the evolutionary tree described by Charles Darwin. They are the most ancient biological ancestors we have. They are formed by microbial mats trapping falling sediment. Over thousands of years, they slowly build solid rock structures. Because they grow so slowly, these colonies are incredibly fragile. A single physical disturbance can instantly destroy thousands of years of history. Protecting them requires keeping visitors physically elevated. This wooden boardwalk allows people to observe the formations without stepping on the delicate living surfaces. Evolutionary significance often looks like mundane geological clutter. These rocks remind us that some of the most important life on Earth requires active protection rather than casual dismissal. Pushing north past the Tropic of Capricorn, the landscape moves into a harsher, more demanding climate. Evidence of the extreme aridity is everywhere. You can see it in the dry, sandy riverbeds and the bleached fallen timber that has been stripped of all moisture by the sun. Yet even here, life finds a way to concentrate. Monroe's banana plantation sits right in the middle of this terrain, its bright green leaves contrasting sharply with the surrounding dust. This hidden oasis supports an unexpected variety of flora, like these vibrant pink bougainvillea flowers. The landscape is far from dead. It is highly adapted and resilient, essentially waiting for the right conditions to produce an explosion of life. Near a remote roadhouse, you can find pieces of rusted machinery that, at a distance, look like abandoned agricultural tractors left to rot in the sand. This machine actually functioned as a power generator. It provided the essential electricity needed to run a human outpost in the middle of the Outback. Survival in this isolation requires total self-sufficiency. Maintaining a roadhouse means using heavy mechanical ingenuity to manufacture your own utilities from scratch. These rusted remains tell a story of industrial persistence. They highlight the sheer mechanical effort required to maintain a human presence in a place where standard infrastructure does not exist. You finally arrive at Coral Bay just as the sun sets, marking the end of the long drive through the interior. Ningaloo Reef serves as the vibrant, aquatic boundary for this deeply complex and ancient terrestrial region. The true history of our planet isn't always found in obvious tourist destinations. Much of it is hidden in plain sight, tucked away in the places we often dismiss as empty. When you look at a landscape and see nothingness, remember to look closer. You might be staring at the earliest biological origins of our world. Experiencing Australia's legendary coral reefs usually comes with a specific expectation. To see famous sites like the Great Barrier Reef on the eastern seaboard, you have to charter a boat and travel miles offshore. But look at the opposite side of the continent. While the East Coast Reef sits far out to sea, Western Australia's Ningaloo Reef follows the shoreline for over 200 kilometers. This aerial shot shows exactly what that proximity means for a traveler. You don't need a boat. You can walk straight off the arid, sandy beach and immediately step into turquoise water and living coral. That accessibility turns spots like Coral Bay into bustling tourist hubs. Visitors can spend their days taking glass-bottom boat rides or floating peacefully over the shallow reefs. It also provides a reliable backup plan. When organized offshore tours like whale watching get canceled due to weather, you can grab a mask and jump right into the sea. But the casual tourist experience has a hard physical boundary. Most standard waterproof snorkeling cameras are only rated to survive down to about 16 feet. The ease of these surface-level views is tied directly to that depth limit. To see what lives further down, you have to leave the shallow water gear behind. Leaving the sunny beach means plunging backward into a much harsher environment. The water temperature drops sharply the deeper you go. Surviving that cold requires a serious logistical escalation. Divers wear double wetsuits just to maintain their body heat and take a small dinghy to reach the larger dive boats anchored further offshore. One of those specific offshore sites is known as Asho's Break. It's a rugged, demanding stretch of the ocean floor. This schematic demonstrates why it's so physically taxing. A gap in the solid reef wall acts like a funnel, forcing water through the break. This creates a grueling current, making divers swim intensely to hold position. But this intense flow serves a vital purpose. It funnels food, constantly bombarding the ecosystem with nutrients. Because of this continuous supply of food, the coral formations here grow to massive proportions, easily dwarfing the reefs found in famously rich diving spots like the Red Sea. The extreme underwater conditions act as a natural gateway. The ocean hides its most spectacular coral growths from anyone unwilling to endure the physical toll of the current. And because you're operating well beyond that 16-foot camera limit, the experiences down here become strictly undocumented memories. Navigating that deep current reveals eerie sights hidden within the vibrant reef, like an underwater graveyard scattered with the bones of sea turtles. But pushing through to a second dive yields much more peaceful, close-up encounters. This image captures a sea turtle swimming gracefully and naturally along the rocky ocean floor. A moment of wonder. Here, you can find small, speckled moray eels peeking out from the complex coral. Because they are too small to bite, you can actually reach out, touch them, and safely hold them in your hands. The deep water is shared by a dense variety of species alongside the eels and turtles, including small rays, catfish, and vividly colored Christmas tree worms. Down here, you aren't watching from behind glass. You're moving through the same current as the life around you. That same demand for deeper immersion applies on land. Exploring the rugged interior requires deliberately leaving the less adventurous members of a tour group behind to push further into the wild. By evening, a long transit inland toward places like Duck Creek completely replaces the blue marine environment with this wide, arid outback valley of harsh reds and browns. Out here, you are introduced to traditional Aboriginal bush tucker, specifically a late-night meal of kangaroo tail. The preparation process is gritty and entirely unconventional. You start by shaving off as much fur as possible, and then roll the raw meat up tightly in old newspapers. To cook it, you simply throw the wrapped meat directly into the fire. The burning newspaper quickly carbonizes and creates a protective shell around the tail. After letting it sit in the white ashes, you strip away the charred outer skin. The dark, gelatinous meat inside closely resembles the physical structure and taste of a turkey neck. The region's most memorable moments aren't found in a brochure. They're earned by diving into high-speed currents or sharing a meal cooked in the ashes of an outback fire. The Pilbara region of Western Australia is a massive, arid expanse. It is a landscape defined by raw, profitable resources rather than hospitality. Tom Price is a purpose-built town, established by a mining company to harvest a single mountain of iron ore. Through the Hammersley venture, developers systematically dismantled a mountain, leaving behind these massive, tiered red earth excavations. Moving this much earth requires a heavy, single-purpose infrastructure, specifically a sprawling rail network designed to export the iron ore across the continent. This corporate outpost eventually drew a diverse community. Because of the extreme remoteness and low cost of housing, many Aboriginal populations moved in, establishing a human presence in the shadow of the industry. On the surface, human engineering has commodified and tamed this rugged Australian terrain. Just down the road, the industry stops at the border of Karijini National Park. Here, the flat plains drop away into steep-walled red rock canyons. Visitors come to Karijini with varied goals, some for a standard vacation, others to find a sense of self within the remote landscape. At the surface, the park offers a quiet beauty. White-barked river gums, a type of eucalyptus, reflect off the calm water of the river. This tranquil environment is a deceptive layer. Karijini is a place that resists human mastery the moment you begin to descend. The danger becomes apparent at the upper rim of the Hancock and Weano gorges. It is common to find groups of hikers huddled around emergency radios, signaling for help. In one case, a hiker with a broken leg waited hours for a rescue that didn't reach the hospital until well after midnight. Local guides warn that injuries and casualties are a constant reality in these canyons. The descent into Weano Gorge begins with rock formations that mimic man-made stairs, making the first steps down feel manageable. But the gorge soon demands that you abandon your surface world protections. To navigate the wet rock, hikers must remove their shoes and socks to find grip. Survival in this environment requires you to strip away modern gear and physically adapt to the stone, rather than imposing your will onto it. As you move into the deeper subterranean zones, the walls close in. Sunlight is reduced to a narrow beam, fighting its way to the bottom of the crevasse. To reach the handrail pool, you have to grip a metal handrail bolted to the rock and lower yourself down a series of ropes into the green water. Eventually, basic technology fails. To traverse the flooded crevasses ahead, you have to leave your camera equipment behind and swim through freezing water. The terrain becomes increasingly hostile. Those who continue must push past hidden waterfalls and wade through deep circular plunge pools carved by the water. The journey ends at a sheer drop-off. Without professional climbing ropes, further progress is impossible. At this depth, human authority vanishes. The heavy engineering seen on the surface gives way to the raw, impassable power of the geology. Climbing back out of the gorge brings a sense of relief. You collect those who stayed behind and break back into the daylight. On the surface, the visual expanse returns. You are once again surrounded by the Outback's quiet ecology, like these tall, reddish-brown termite mounds. The flooded tension of the gorge contrasts with these slow, ancient biological processes happening in the open air. It is a reminder that the tranquil beauty of the surface is a thin layer resting atop a much more unforgiving foundation. At night, the scale of the Pilbara expands. The perspective shifts from the local gorge to the vastness of the southern hemisphere sky. By leaving a camera aperture open for 20 minutes, you can literally see the planet rotate beneath the stars. This visual proof of a spinning Earth connects back to the nature of the region. We are standing on an ancient rock moving through space, a place we only temporarily inhabit. We may build towns and dismantle mountains on the surface, but the geological core of the Pilbara remains unchanged. It is a massive, ancient landscape that we only briefly pass through. Most tourist itineraries for Karijini National Park feature sunny hikes and perfectly timed photo ops. But if you actually want to see the deeper cuts of Hancock Gorge, you start at 5 in the morning, long before the sun clears the horizon. You are stepping blindly into an ancient, uneven fracture in the earth, navigating a sheer drop with only a handheld flashlight to find your footing. One wrong step in the dark has serious consequences. This specific descent is notorious for snapping the legs and ankles of hikers who misjudge the slick stone. Further down, the path narrows into shoulder-width rock crevices. You have to lower yourself into ice-cold water, wading through tight corridors where the walls press in from both sides and ladders are non-existent. But then dawn breaks. The shadows lift to reveal exactly what you climbed down here for. A massive, vibrant gorge cutting deep into the red Pilbara rock, sheltering a thriving canopy at the bottom. While the gorge demands physical endurance, the road out presents a far more unpredictable logistical challenge. Conquering the jagged rocks means absolutely nothing if your ride out falls victim to the brutal, hidden traps of the Outback. Back on the dirt roads, the bus hits a harsh bump. Immediately, a grinding, heavy rubbing sound echoes from the back tire. It quickly escalates until the rear differential completely gives out. In a city, a blown differential means calling a tow truck and waiting an hour. Out here in the Pilbara region, A dead vehicle is an immediate logistical emergency. Looking at this map, Karijini is an island. You are hundreds of kilometers away from any mechanics or heavy infrastructure. Other groups have broken down in this region and sat stranded for 4 straight days waiting for heavy rescue. While the driver diagnoses the problem, the only option is abandoning the sweltering metal box. You end up hiking 5 kilometers down an exposed, sun-baked dirt road, surrounded by endless red soil and dry brush. The sheer scale of the landscape takes a simple mechanical failure and instantly compounds it into a struggle for survival. Absolute isolation breeds a strict code of mutual reliance among the few travelers out here, a concept you might call Outback karma. A day earlier, the group had helped guide 2 strangers navigating through Weano Gorge. Now, those exact same 2 men spot the broken-down bus and pull over, handing over a heavy-duty chain. Using that borrowed heavy chain and sheer mechanical ingenuity, the driver rigs the busted differential right there in the dirt. It's a temporary field repair, but it holds well enough to get the tires moving again. And that makeshift repair allows the group to finally reach Dale's Gorge. Deep beneath the arid scrublands, water cascades down layered ancient cliffs into a secluded circular basin. It is a stark contrast. Above ground, you have unforgiving, dry red dirt. Down here, you find a vibrant, deep teal pool, perfectly sustaining a completely hidden ecosystem of ferns and gum trees. Karijini operates on a strict reward system. You only get to access these hidden, life-sustaining oases if you are willing to endure the logistical punishments of the surface. Driving out of the park toward the coast for the night, a new hazard appears on the horizon. Plumes of smoke rise from an active bushfire spreading through the dry grass. These fires serve as a deliberate, sophisticated ecological strategy practiced by Aboriginal peoples for thousands of years. Fire aggressively burns away overgrown brush, reducing it to a carbon base and depositing locked nutrients into the topsoil. The first rainfalls hitting this carbon layer trigger an explosive regeneration of fresh plant life, immediately drawing native wildlife back to the area to feed. This process is assisted by millions of tiny biological agents. Toweling termite mounds act as the other half of the regeneration cycle, constantly churning and aerating the hard-baked earth. This charred forest floor provides the necessary nutrients and physical space for the first rains to trigger a massive growth of new seedlings. It mirrors the grueling 14-hour ordeal of treacherous climbs, shattered mechanical parts, and blistering 5-kilometer hikes under the Pilbara sun. The Outback doesn't offer easy paths. The beauty hidden deep in the gorges and the survival of the land itself relies entirely on this continuous, necessary cycle of friction, destruction, and renewal. "8 days into a 19-day expedition through the Outback, the reality of the road sets in. It's a constant accumulation of red dust, engine rumble, and a deep, heavy fatigue. You realize exactly how small you are when you pull up to 80 Mile Beach. This coastline stretches out for dozens of miles without interruption, a reminder of the scale of the geography you have to cross just to reach the midpoint of the trip. Arriving in Broome offers a massive physical release. Emerging onto this sudden peninsula, surrounded by harsh terrain and turquoise ocean, provides the immediate comfort of a clean shower, fresh clothes, and a hot meal. This diagram illustrates what happens the moment the group hits civilization. The 20-person team that survived the dirt roads together immediately splits. Only 9 will continue on the primary route north to Darwin, while the rest head off on their own separate paths. It creates a strange psychological tension. You finally have a 2-day oasis to rest and recover, but you have to spend it saying goodbye to people who have become a makeshift family. The town itself has a deep multicultural history. You can see this in the local cemeteries, where Japanese and Chinese graves sit side by side. Markers like this one for J. Terashita offer proof of the diverse pioneers who lived and worked in this remote outpost over a century ago. The geography holds history that is much older. Embedded right here in the red rock of the coastline are fossilized dinosaur footprints. Out on Ganthium Point, where the red dirt drops into the ocean, stands an automated lighthouse. Years ago, it was manned by a keeper whose wife, Stacy, suffered from severe arthritis. This diagram shows his solution. He carved a special pool near the sea. During the day, the high tide comes in and fills the basin. The sun warms the trapped water throughout the afternoon. By nightfall, he carried her out for a heated natural bath. Against the massive, indifferent forces of the Outback coast, you find this intimate human effort required to create a small pocket of comfort. Heading back into the center of town, Broome's energy takes over. There was a bustling Chinatown, swarms of backpackers, and even an open-air cinema. Yet alongside the local charm is the industrial reality of life out here. The region relies on massive road trains hauling heavy loads of cattle across the red dirt to supply the interior. The Boab tree's massive trunk and spindly branches make it look planted upside down. It acts as an internal water reservoir, hoarding moisture during wet months to survive the long, scorching dry season. And then there is Cable Beach. Named for the telegraph cable that once connected Australia to England, its modern daytime reality is a busy, sunny, and often nude beach. As the evening approaches, the atmosphere shifts. Sunset camel trains provide a quiet backdrop for the remaining travelers to say their final goodbyes to the friends staying behind. From industrial cattle trucks to sunset camel rides, these shifts capture the rhythm of outback travel. You are constantly moving between harsh utility and quiet beauty. By day 10, the group's departure leaves a quiet atmosphere. With one day left before heading north, a trip to the local crocodile farm provides a way to pass the afternoon. This shows a biological necessity for these predators, called thermoregulation. Because they are cold-blooded, they rest motionless under the sun, opening their jaws to soak up the heat and regulate their body temperature. Looking at the older males, you can see missing teeth and scarred snouts, the physical results of a violent social hierarchy. Watching them sit there, completely still but ready to snap, breaks the relaxed rhythm of the Broome oasis. It's a primal energy that signals the end of the break and helps shift your focus back to the road ahead. Looking back, Broome served as a dense intersection of local history, oddities, and the sudden reality of a group pulling apart. The experience suggests that an outback trip is measured as much by the intense, transient bonds you form with strangers as it is by the miles on the odometer. For the 9 travelers heading back out, the social dynamic has changed. After 8 days sharing the same truck and 2 days navigating a new town, they are no longer a collection of strangers, but a smaller, more familiar group that knows exactly what to expect from one another. Reaching the midpoint of a journey like this forces a transition. You lose the energy of the original 20-person group, but you carry forward a clear understanding of the road ahead and exactly what it will take to reach the finish line in Darwin. This map of the Kimberley region in Western Australia shows one of the most isolated places on Earth. If you want to travel from Broome up to Darwin, the most direct route takes you across a massive stretch of red dirt known as the Gibb River Road. But you can only make that drive during the Australian winter. When the wet season arrives, massive floods completely wash out the dirt tracks, cutting the entire region off from the rest of the continent for half the year. When the dry season finally returns, the landscape opens up. Modern ecotourists flock to the outback in four-wheel drives, passing enormous termite mounds and sprawling cattle stations in search of untouched wilderness. The stillness of these limestone formations hides their history as the front line of a violent conflict. These landmarks provided the tactical infrastructure for the colonization of the Kimberley. Evidence of this period persists in the scarred wood of the trees and the stone of the caves. This environment serves as a direct, physical record of the frontier wars. A few hours out of Broome, you'll find the Boab tree. It is a biological anomaly that survives the brutal dry season by drawing on a massive reserve of water stored right inside its swollen, bulbous trunk. In the late 19th century, colonial police repurposed the tree's natural anatomy. They carved into these water-filled trunks to create hollowed-out bases that functioned as temporary, inescapable holding cells. During forced marches, officers would cram up to 20 captured Aboriginal men inside a single tree. The prisoners were chained together around the neck, held in the dark until they were moved to the next town. The colonizers relied heavily on these brutal tactics because they faced a significant tactical disadvantage. They had almost no ability to navigate the outback or track people through the dense bush. To solve their blind spot, the police hired indigenous men to do the tracking for them. One of their most effective recruits was a man named Jandamarra, nicknamed Pigeon by the colonials. He was tasked with hunting down his own people. The police maintained their grip on the frontier by turning the landscape into a cage and by using the native population's own navigational skills against them. But Jandamarra's allegiance eventually broke. He witnessed the officers he worked for systematically capture, chain, and brutalize the Aboriginal population, and he turned on them. One evening, he shot and killed 2 sleeping police officers, freed his imprisoned people, and fled into the night. The police force's best tracker became the most wanted fugitive in Western Australia. For over 2 years, Jandamarra led a resistance group using Tunnel Creek as his primary stronghold. The creek carved a subterranean river system through the rock, creating a complex, dark environment for a hideout. The total darkness and labyrinth of hidden crevasses gave him a tactical advantage. He moved through secret passages to ambush the colonial patrols sent to capture him. The police themselves never learned how to navigate the cave. Jandamarra was only defeated after he took another Aboriginal man's wife. That man sought revenge by leading the police directly to Jandamarra's exact location inside the cave. His multi-year resistance showed that survival in the outback was dictated by ecological mastery, knowing exactly how to use the land to stay alive. Today, Tunnel Creek is a popular stop for road trippers. Tourists take off their shoes to wade through the same dark waters where Jandamarra was hunted and killed over a century ago. At sunset, visitors sit near the gorge, watching swarms of bats pour out of the cave to feed. Most of them pack up their cameras and head back to camp, unaware of the conflict that happened right where they are standing. The Kimberley landscape provided the primary tools for colonial control and the essential cover for Indigenous resistance. Every gorge and ridgeline shaped the outcome of these encounters. While wooden buildings and police records might vanish, the Boabs and the caves remain. The history of the Kimberley is fixed in the terrain, visible to anyone who knows where to look. By day 12 in the Australian outback, your body stops fighting the morning sun. When the light hits your face at 5:30 a.m., you simply wake up. There is no roof to block the glare, and 11 straight days of living outdoors strips away any remaining comfort. Many travelers imagine the outback as a romantic landscape of sunsets and easy adventure. The reality is a grinding, unair-conditioned bus ride through raw bush, where the heat is a physical weight you carry through every hike. Watching the sunrise over the scrub, you begin to feel the mounting heat, and a question surfaces. Why do people willingly subject themselves to this level of exhaustion day after day? Exploring this landscape requires a specific kind of currency. Out here, access to natural beauty is never free. It is a transaction paid for in physical endurance and sweat. The pattern is consistent across the territory. The most profound geological marvels are shielded by immediate, severe hazards. To reach the heart of the outback, you have to bypass the sentries guarding the gate. Windjana Gorge is a prime example. These massive limestone walls are actually an ancient coral reef. Millions of years of erosion have left the jagged skeleton of a seafloor standing high above the desert sand. This chart shows the region's transition through deep time. This entire landscape was once entirely underwater, serving as a massive marine ecosystem before tectonic shifts pushed the reef into the sun. While the ancient sea life has long since fossilized, new predators have claimed the remaining water. The riverbanks are now the domain of freshwater crocodiles, or freshies. They wait on the rocks like a statue, mouths gaped wide to regulate their body temperature. They stay perfectly still for hours. The only sign of life is the occasional subtle movement of an eye tracking you as you pass. This creates a strange mental friction. You are surrounded by the intellectual awe of a prehistoric ocean, yet your primal brain is entirely focused on monitoring the live predators waiting just inches from your feet. Galvins Gorge offers a different kind of sanctuary. A waterfall drops into a circular pool of still water, creating a scene that looks more like a classic painting than a desert canyon. The hike to reach this pool is short and picturesque. It is a gentle trek that feels like a break from the harshness of the trail, lulling you into a rare sense of relaxation. Hidden within this lush greenery is the region's most prolific threat. Australia's highly venomous spider population thrives in the shaded brush surrounding these waterholes. This graph illustrates why vigilance is mandatory. In this region, venomous attacks from spiders outpace the combined total of snake bites and marine stings. Processing the beauty of Galvins Gorge requires two minds, one to enjoy the pristine sanctuary, and another to scan every branch and leaf for a lethal, invisible resident. Manning Gorge demands a much higher price for entry. Reaching it requires a 2-hour trek through raw, hostile terrain under the full weight of the midday sun. The trail is a navigational challenge, marked only by piles of rocks and discarded tin cans. If you lose sight of these primitive markers, it is incredibly easy to walk straight into the deep bush. Straying from the path brings you into contact with spinifex grass. These plants are as sharp as needles, and they easily slice through skin and clothing as you push through the scrub. The reward for the pain is an isolated oasis. Water flows over tiers of rock into deep pools, where local water monitors swim undisturbed by the crowds found at more accessible sites. The difficulty of the trek acts as a filter. By placing a barrier of razor-sharp grass and exhausting heat in the way, the landscape ensures the gorge remains an isolated sanctuary for those willing to pay the physical toll. Eventually, the compounding fatigue causes the body to fail. On the return journey from Manning, a simple trip on the rocky path can lead to a dangerous fall as your coordination begins to slip. When you are injured, the environment becomes even more aggressive. Every needle-sharp blade of spinifex tears into fresh cuts, making the final miles of the trek a slow, stinging endurance test. Surviving a day like this shifts the focus from individual effort to the group. Once back at camp, the isolation of the hike is replaced by a reliance on the people around you. Recovery is a communal effort. Your companions use tea tree oil to sanitize the cuts and share energy drinks like Staminate to replace what the heat has stripped from your body. After 12 days, it becomes clear that this ecosystem is incompatible with the idea of a passive, relaxing holiday. The terrain and the wildlife actively resist human presence. The Outback's beauty cannot be merely observed from the window of a bus. It must be survived, it must be bled for, and ultimately earned by facing the gatekeepers on their own terms. Imagine being jolted awake at 5:30 in the morning by the flashing lights of an emergency services team sweeping through your campsite. They were searching for a hiker who wandered off the tricky trail at Manning Gorge the day before. That camper spent 24 freezing hours completely lost in the wilderness before rescue teams finally tracked him down. This is the Kimberley region in Western Australia. It is a vast, rugged expanse of red dirt and ancient rock that actively punishes anyone who arrives unprepared. If humans are so incredibly fragile out here, it raises an obvious question. How does anything actually manage to survive, let alone thrive, in such a brutal environment? Driving down the deeply rutted four-wheel drive tracks of the Gibb River Road, you quickly realize that the Outback demands extreme physical adaptation. Take the Boab tree. Instead of relying on regular rainfall, it uses its massive, swollen trunk as a living reservoir to hoard water and endure devastating droughts. Gum and eucalyptus trees employ a strict energy budget. They only grow thick, protective bark at the base of their trunks to shield against bushfires. They refuse to waste precious resources wrapping their upper branches where the flames can't reach. The insects are just as capable. These towering termite mounds are architectural marvels, completely floodproof, fireproof, and structurally dense enough to withstand the weight of a car driving directly over them. While the plants and insects rely on static, built-in defenses, native predators like the wedge-tail eagle are constantly scanning the harsh terrain, waiting to capitalize on any sign of weakness. Nothing out here exists by accident. Every species relies on hyper-specialized biological engineering to outsmart the extreme heat, frequent fires, and relentless scarcity. Humans have had to figure out their own workarounds. At remote outposts like the Drysdale Cattle Station, sheer isolation has forced them to diversify their income, leaning heavily on passing tourists to keep the operation afloat. You can see this environmental mitigation in the most unexpected places. To protect their delicate public payphone from searing heat and choking dust, the station owners installed it directly inside an old refrigerator. It makes you wonder how the original colonial settlers managed. Trying to impose standard European farming and building practices on this dirt must have been nearly impossible. Modern life in the Outback still relies on this kind of active mechanical shielding against the hostility of the environment, rather than natural biological harmony. But out here, there are pockets of relief. Arriving at the King Edward River Base Camp reveals a lush, water-filled sanctuary that stands in stark contrast to the endless dry red dust. After days of navigating the wilderness, standing directly under a cascading waterfall and scrubbing off layers of dirt feels like an absolute luxury. That physical comfort extends into the evening. Gathered around the camp, the group traded trail rations for a massive dinner of roast lamb, potatoes, carrots, and a bush cheesecake baked by the camp cook, Eddie. Navigating the Outback's strict rules reveals a profound tranquility and beauty hidden behind the rugged exterior. The truest expression of those rhythms came after dinner. Eddie produced his didgeridoo to perform an auditory map of survival. He introduced a traditional story called the Kangaroo Hunt. It follows a hunter stalking a mob of kangaroos through the tall, dry grass, carefully watching his prey. Through the instrument, you hear the exact environmental cues the hunter relies on, like the sudden, distant howl of dingoes, which the hunter knows will scatter the animals. Without using a single word, the didgeridoo mimics the heavy bounce of the fleeing kangaroos, the rhythmic, cutting spin of a thrown boomerang, and the final, decisive strike of the hunt. Compare that deep, harmonious understanding of the land to the camper who spent the night freezing off the trail. True mastery of the Outback requires transcending mere endurance, turning the struggle for survival into a refined art form. By day 14 of a 19-day expedition through the Australian Kimberley, the physical toll starts to compound. We woke up at 5 a.m., needing to squeeze every bit of driving from the cool morning hours before the sun peaked. This sign at the entrance to the Gibb River Road highlights exactly what we were up against. The route out to the Mitchell Plateau is incredibly remote and unpaved, making it the roughest terrain we had encountered on the entire trip. And then there are the relentless flies. Driving up the coast from Perth to Broome, the air was relatively clear, but deep in the Kimberley, they are completely inescapable. I even had 2 fly right into my mouth before breakfast. The environment is also bone dry, meaning everything is buried under a pervasive layer of red dust. Every time we unloaded the vehicle, we had to scrape an inch of grime off our bags. Even the palm trees lining the dirt tracks were permanently stained red. The dirt, the relentless insects, and the sheer fatigue are the mandatory price of admission. The Outback demands you endure its harshest conditions before it lets you near its isolated wonders. The reward comes after a kilometer of hiking through rough, rocky scrub. The dry terrain suddenly breaks, revealing Little Merton's Falls, a quiet, green oasis hidden directly within the arid rock face. Pressing further into the canyon, you find evidence of the people who walked this landscape long before us. These tall, slender figures painted onto the rock walls are known as Bradshaw paintings. What makes them unusual is their composition, differing from the Windjana art typical to this region. Instead of using the standard red ochre found locally, these artists used different pigments, leaving local Aborigines unsure of exactly who created them. Scientific analysis dates these pigments at over 17,000 years old, placing them among the oldest known cave art in the world. Some of the illustrations even seem to depict people swimming or flying across the stone. Another 2.5 kilometers of hiking brings you to the main event, the multi-tiered Mitchell Falls. Massive volumes of water cascade down a series of deep, stepped rock formations into vast green pools below. Looking out over the water, the Mitchell Plateau feels completely isolated from modern life. It has quietly preserved both deep human history and fragile natural ecosystems untouched for millennia. But outback conditions are volatile. On the drive back toward camp, a local official flagged down our vehicle to intercept our guide, Eddie, with an urgent warning. Another tourist group had departed their camp that morning without properly extinguishing their fire. The dry morning wind caught the remaining embers, blowing them into the surrounding brush and igniting a rapidly spreading bushfire. The official informed us that our specific campsite was still intact, but emergency precautions were already underway in case the wind shifted. As we approached our area, the devastation was immediate. The vibrant bushland we had driven through just hours ago was gone, replaced by miles of blackened earth and a sunset completely choked with thick smoke. We passed right by the active head of the fire. It was aggressively consuming every bit of dry scrub and grass it could reach, burning right up to the edge of the dirt track. We had just spent the morning admiring a delicate landscape that had survived intact for 17,000 years. Seeing the region actively gutted by a single careless campfire was entirely sobering. The bus was dead silent as we pulled into camp. The staff had already gathered our swags and belongings into a protected pile in the center of the clearing, prepping for a rapid evacuation. We were surrounded by rocky, uneven terrain, which acted as a natural fire break and offered a fragile sense of security. But as the sun went down, that comfort quickly faded. The fire was still burning heavily, and it was close. Just 100 meters away, the flames were glowing intensely in the pitch black, crackling loud enough to hear clearly over the camp. The thick smoke started blowing directly into our area. I found myself pacing the perimeter, nervously checking the rocks to see if they'd actually hold up against a wall of flames. I went to warn Eddie, unsure if he realized how close the fire had gotten. He was completely unfazed. With absolute calm, he assessed the wind and the terrain and assured us we had nothing to worry about. I went to sleep that night with the smell of smoke deep in my clothes. The outback offers incredible ancient beauty, but it also leaves you completely exposed to its dangers. Out here, your survival often relies entirely on trusting the people who truly understand the land. By day 15 of a 19-day overland trek down Australia's Gibb River Road, the physical toll is undeniable. Your muscles ache, red dust is ground into every piece of gear, and the primary goal is simply finding a safe place to rest. But the Kimberley region rarely grants a full night of rest. Last night, an intense bushfire swept through the scrub, and this is what we woke up to. We were boxed in on 3 sides. The only thing that kept the fire from consuming our tents was a patch of rugged, rocky terrain and a simple dirt track on the 4th side that acted as a natural fire break. Standing there in the morning air, you can look past your untouched camping gear and see charred, smoldering timber just 50 meters away. The margin of safety out here is measured in mere meters of rock and dirt. Surviving deep in the outback rarely has anything to do with conquering the elements. You survive because a few meters of stone and a dirt road happen to be perfectly placed to block a wall of flame. If you look closely at the foliage that managed to survive the blaze, you'll find an organism uniquely adapted to this canopy, the green ant. Unlike many ant species that burrow into the earth, green ants avoid the ground entirely, building intricate nests in trees by tightly gluing leaves together. For travelers, they serve as bush tucker. Catch one, and that translucent green abdomen becomes a source of survival sustenance. Touching it directly to your tongue delivers a sharp, concentrated hit of ascorbic acid. In a pinch, you can even crush a handful of them into hot water to produce a highly acidic restorative tea. The same environment that threatens to consume the camp with fire also provides highly specialized, ready-to-use biological chemistry, if you understand the ecology well enough to harvest it. Packing up our surviving gear, we pushed back onto the heavily corrugated dirt of the Gibb River Road. A short drive led us to a small cubbyhole tucked 15 feet up into a rocky outcrop, known as Skull Cave. It's a quiet, solitary place. Resting inside the rock crevices are human bones, a stark reminder of the ancient human presence in this punishing environment. That history is recorded directly onto the stone. Painted across the cave ceiling are Windjana figures, ancestral spirits associated with the clouds and the coming of the rain, alongside local wildlife. By documenting these rain spirits, the early inhabitants marked a site tied directly to the cycles of water. Thousands of years later, we were tracking those same cycles ourselves, as our own supplies had just run dry. Fortunately, the King Edward River flows nearby. The water there is so pristine and uncontaminated that we could drink it straight from the banks without any need for boiling or purification. Finding natural sources like that is critical because the distances out here are massive. Between isolated resupply outposts like Drysdale Station and the distant Cockburn Ranges, you are completely on your own. The terrain itself constantly fights your progress. You spend hours navigating heavy overland vehicles through deep, unimproved river crossings that look picturesque but can quickly swallow an unprepared crew. The technology has evolved, but the rules of the Kimberley haven't. Crossing this region safely requires the same profound respect for water sources and rugged geography today as it did thousands of years ago. As evening approached, the dust finally gave way to Home Valley, a remote tourism station that signals a transition out of the deep wild. After 15 days of accumulating ash and red dirt, stepping into a place that provides a cooked barbecue dinner and cold beer is a significant physical relief. Comfort relies on clever Outback engineering, specifically this device, known locally as a donkey. It's a modified oil barrel rigged with plumbing. By building an open wood fire directly underneath the heavy metal casing, the thermodynamics deliver a steady stream of steaming hot water. While the donkey provides a safe, contained way to wash up, the camp itself sits right next to Bindula Creek, a natural waterway that looks inviting in the heat, but you absolutely do not swim in it. Even adjacent to a bustling tourist camp, the waterways here remain the territory of saltwater crocodiles. You don't truly appreciate the luxury of a hot shower and a safe place to sleep until you've spent weeks navigating the fire and the sheer scale of the untamed outback. The Gibb River Road in Western Australia is notorious. It's a 600-kilometer stretch of punishing dirt and rock that demands complete self-reliance from anyone brave enough to drive it. On the morning of Day 16, our crew snapped a quick group photo at Home Valley, packing up under what looked like another deceptively normal outback sunrise. But we were nursing a hidden crisis. A few days earlier, out near Mitchell Falls, the tour bus had blown an engine gasket. That meant a steady, unstoppable leak in the cooling system. Because of that leak, the bus could only run for about an hour before the radiator ran completely dry. If we pushed it any further, the engine temperature would spike, and the bus would be dead. So that was our reality for the day, a crippled vehicle and a ticking clock, with miles of jagged terrain standing between us and the nearest mechanic. Right out of the gate, we had to ford the Pentecost River. Pushing a failing engine through deep water in a landscape this vast is risky. If the bus stalls here, nobody is coming to tow us out. We made it across, but the tone for the day was set. Every single mile we spent on the dirt from here on out was a calculated gamble against total mechanical failure. Our original itinerary had us spending the night at the luxurious El Cuestro station, but their prices had recently spiked, so our tour company had swapped our lodging to Home Valley instead. Even with the engine troubles, we decided to pause the tense drive to tackle the hike up to Emma Gorge. The trail itself was a workout. We had to navigate a rocky, uneven path and keep a very close eye out for local spiders along the way. The payoff at the end of the trail was a towering, beautiful waterfall, plunging into an icy pool of pristine water. The water was freezing. Some of the group, like Shoko, hopped out immediately to warm up, while others found a small tidal pool separated from the main basin that felt like a perfectly heated little hot tub. After miles of corrugated road and dodging spiders, that freezing plunge resets the system. The value of the pool is tied directly to the effort of the approach. It's a reward found only where the pavement ends. After the hike and a quick lunch, we got an unexpected boost. Christine, a friend who had left our group back in Broome, suddenly pulled up with another tour company. Stressed as we were about our bus, Christine was roughing it on a whole different level. She was packed into a tiny four-wheel drive vehicle, committed to 9 straight days of bush camping without a single shower. Seeing her lifted our spirits, but we still had to face our own reality. The leak in the bus was getting worse, forcing a serious conversation about the rest of the day. Our guide, Eddie, had to make a tough call. For the safety of the group, he decided to completely scrap our planned detour to Zebedee Hot Springs and drive straight toward Kununurra while the engine was still running. Skipping the hot springs was the price of staying mobile. Instead of soaking in thermal pools, we spent the afternoon watching the temperature gauge, trading a major highlight of the trip for the sheer hope that the gasket would hold until the highway. We limped along, stopping every hour to pour more water into the radiator, until we finally reached the end of the Gibb River Road. The moment our tires hit smooth, paved blacktop was pure relief. You could physically feel the tension drain out of the bus as we merged onto the Great Northern Highway. Of course, civilization comes with its own hazards. We immediately had to start sharing the road with 53-meter-long road trains barreling down the highway. We navigated the traffic and finally pulled into our campground in Kununurra, surrounded by Boab trees and, more importantly, industrial buildings and mechanics. With the bus safely parked for the night and a repair scheduled for the morning, we could finally relax and take in the sunset over Lake Kununurra. We usually ignore the engineering of a smooth road until every vibration threatens to shake an engine apart. Crossing that final cattle grate onto the blacktop meant we'd finally stopped gambling with the desert. This map of Australia highlights just how isolated the Kimberley region truly is. Way up in the remote northwestern corner, hours from any major city, sits the town of Kununurra. It exists largely as an agricultural hub, drawing seasonal backpackers looking for work, all sustained by the sprawling irrigation of nearby Lake Argyll. Our actual target today is the ancient Bungles, also known as Pernalulu. Because of the rugged terrain, an overland drive simply isn't an option for a single-day trip. The journey begins with an hour-long flight in a tiny fixed-wing Cessna. Locals have a specific nickname for this leg of the trip, the Comet Vomit. The intense thermal currents rising off the Outback guarantee a severely turbulent ride the entire way. If you want to see geological history untouched by modern infrastructure, you have to leave comfort behind and accept the bruises that come with it. Immediately after takeoff, the familiar grain farmland of Kununurra falls away, replaced by an arid landscape heavily scarred by human water management. Looking down at Lake Argyll's dams, the deep artificial blue water sits in sharp contrast against the dry, sun-baked earth. That human footprint gets even heavier as we fly over abandoned diamond mines. The sheer volume of dirt moved is staggering, leaving huge terraced excavations carved directly into the Outback. But the most famous operation out here, the active Argyll Diamond Mine, features a multi-million-dollar engineering oversight. This schematic shows the massive paved airport runway that engineers constructed to service the remote site. Only after pouring the asphalt did surveyors realize they had built the runway directly on top of a massive, undiscovered diamond deposit. Eventually, they will have to rip up the entire airstrip and relocate it to get to the stones. Out here, human ambition frequently collides with the reality of the Earth, and the Earth usually wins. The Cessna brings us back to the ground with a harsh, bumpy landing on an unpaved dirt track serving as the Bungle Airport. We barely have time to stretch our legs before pivoting to our final transport, a 30-minute aerial tour directly over the range. For this leg, we board specialized helicopters. As you can see, these choppers have absolutely no doors, leaving zero barrier between you, the sky, and the steep cliff sides below. Some people thrive in this environment. Helen, on her first ever helicopter ride, leaned right into the wind and shot 2 full rolls of film. Others have a very different reaction. Ellen found the sheer physical exposure overwhelming, gripping the seat, too nervous to even lift her camera. Reaching these untouched ridges means trading the security of a cabin for a seat over a 1,000-foot drop, regardless of whether you are ready to look down. As the chopper banks over the edge of the range, the adrenaline of the open doors fades into silence and awe. Below us are the iconic beehive domes, known worldwide for their striking banded stripes of orange and black rock. Tourists travel thousands of miles just to photograph these specific structures, assuming they define the area. But they make up only a tiny fraction of the park. From this altitude, the true scale comes into focus. It's a massive, endless expanse of jagged domes stretching as far as the eye can see. Down on the ground, a labyrinth of multi-day hiking trails winds through the deep gorges and shadows of that stone canopy. While the flight allows us to bypass days of grueling navigation on the ground, witnessing the sheer density of these towers makes the idea of a multi-day hike feel like a logical next step. The return flight to Coonagarra was quiet and safe. After touching down, we said goodbye to Judy, whose journey ended there, while the rest of us packed up and drove on toward Victoria River for the night. Looking down at those endless serrated ridges from above reveals precisely how much of the earth remains beyond the reach of a paved road. Crossing into the Northern Territory feels like entering a different version of the continent. They call it the Nature Territory, a region where the isolation of the Outback is at its most untamed. Capturing a photograph of the local wallabies requires a specific kind of patience. You have to work within the tricky morning light and move with enough care to avoid scaring them away before you get the shot. Many visitors stay by the lakes near the car park, but those who hike into the bush reach the vibrant red cliffs and deep pools of Edith Falls. After weeks of adapting to the silence of the wilderness, the turn toward Darwin introduces a physical tension. The transition back into the noise of the human world is beginning. Isolation reached its peak at our campsite at Douglas Hot Springs. This isn't a curated environment. It's a creek bed that requires you to physically adjust to the landscape. The water follows a natural thermal gradient. You have to sit in various parts of the creek to find the specific spot where the temperature drops from scalding to a comfortable warmth. Once you find that position, the sense of time disappears. You can sit in the water for hours. True immersion in the Outback means more than surviving the heat. It means syncing your internal clock with a rhythm that hasn't changed in centuries. Day 19 revealed the massive structures of Litchfield, complex biological colonies built by magnetic termites. These massive mounds are feats of precision engineering, built to track the exact movement of the sun throughout the day. Every structure follows a strict rule. They are perfectly aligned to magnetic north. In the morning, their broad faces capture the rising sun, and in the afternoon, they absorb the setting sun to keep the colony warm. At midday, when the sun is at its peak, the mound presents only a razor-thin edge to the sky, preventing the colony from overheating. Ground moisture provides a natural climate control system, acting as an air conditioner through the internal chambers. The colony depends on this precision. If the internal temperature fluctuates beyond their specifications, the queen dies. These self-regulating biological cities stand in sharp contrast to the paved, managed environments waiting for us at the end of the road. Wangi Falls marked a clear shift in the journey. It requires no hike and is designed specifically for easy tourist access. Surrounded by casual tourists after weeks of hard-earned isolation, the sudden change feels physically jarring. Human history became visible at the Adelaide War Cemetery. The focus shifted from the engineering of nature to the record of human mortality. It is a landscape of memory. While the gravestones are marked for those who fell, there are no bodies actually buried here. The transition from the bush back toward the city replaces the unhurried rhythm of the wilderness with managed pathways and heavy memorials. We finally reach Darwin, the geographical end of the wilderness journey. But the modern coastline of this city is built directly over a violent historical record. During World War II, Darwin was bombed by the Japanese in a devastating air raid that mirrored the attack on Pearl Harbor. Reaching the destination meant moving out of the timeless outback and straight into the inescapable weight of human conflict. I tried to extend the isolation, spending 6 days crossing the corrugated dirt tracks of the Red Center to avoid the return to the States. The journey ended for good when I finally boarded a flight back to the United States just 1 week after the September 11th attacks. The chaos of global tragedy stood in contrast to the quiet, self-regulating world I had just left. Crossing the Outback is about more than the views. It's the rare opportunity to see a world that functions in natural harmony, entirely independent of human chaos.